So welcome to the 25 Years of the Staff College podcast. It's a very special year for us, and consequently we have 3 people in the room who've led the Staff College over the years. We thought it'd be useful to talk about our reflections on how the Staff College has helped shape the sector workforce for children's services, how we feel we've contributed and what we think we might do moving into the future. So, to introduce the people in the room, I'm Jane Parfrement and I'm the current Chief Exec of the Staff College.
I'm Jo Davidson and I was the Principal and Chief Executive immediately prior to Jane, but after...
Anton Florek, and I was the very first Director and Chief Executive of the Staff College.
So Anton, it'd be really useful for me to hear actually, as much as for hopefully people on the other end of this podcast, just a little bit about how the Staff College came into being and the early years and its formation.
Right, wow, okay, long story. Late in 1998, a few people in the Society of Education Officers chatted to some senior civil servants in the department for what then I think was Education and Skills, about leadership development in local education authorities. And out of that conversation came an idea that a virtual staff college would be set up on behalf of the sector with some support from central government. What central government didn't say was that that support would be in the form of a nearly retiring director from the department who had left a number of years earlier to run the Sheffield Development Corporation, and that had come to an end, so he came back to his job, substantive job in the department. I think it was 6 years later, and everything had changed, so he was persuaded this was a really good exit project for him. And the original plan was that the college would be virtual simply because it wouldn't own places of delivery, so it would have an admin centre, but it would hire out or work in co-production with clients rather than invest in buildings like a traditional college. And that led to this notion then of co-production within the sector. So it was launched at the annual conference of the Society of Education Officers in July 1999, at which I was. At that time I was a chief officer in Liverpool, and I didn't really know then, and why would I know, that 6 months later I'd actually be the chief executive or director then of the Staff College. It was launched on the principle of all local education authorities subscribing, and the model at the time was that people would invest in master's degrees in leadership as being the principal means of developing leadership. Now, we've learned in the college over many years now that is one way of doing leadership, but it isn't the college's way, really. So those early years started by my visiting. I started in February 2000, and the first job I had is I overlapped for a month with Graham Kendall, who was the bod from the department, and he'd set up regional boards with a university attached to each board, and the plan was that the sector would provide enough people every year to do master's degrees, and the universities involved would produce bespoke leadership programs. Sad to say, neither happened. I went to 6 meetings, 2 of which were quite acrimonious in those days because both parties to the agreement were disappointed. The universities were disappointed because not enough people were fielded, and the sector was disappointed because the universities were just providing materials off the shelf. There was nothing bespoke about it. So one of them in the northeast, I went to an actual meeting of the programme and only 40% turned up. When asked, they said the reason the others didn't turn up is it was clear from the last time it wasn't what we were assuming would be happening. So the thing broke down. So I spent the first year trying to rescue the relationship between the sector and the construct of the Staff College. And along that route I actually got involved with the department, and that started a long relationship with the department over the years, and particularly what I call the formative years, which is basically 2000 to 2003. During that time, most of our work was in education and school improvement, and we became known in the department for an agency that would also deliver conferences and do dissemination, and we earned quite a lot of money during that period from that relationship. So NASIPS was a kind of national standards program for school improvement professionals. We were involved in that as a college. We also did all of the dissemination conferences and all of that, and I've got stuff here which I was going to show you really from that period. But it's interesting that then led us to us supporting the department, this is 2001, 2002, on new structures and in the terms of the Labour government's notion of modernised local authorities and what kind of leadership is required.
And of course that was all pre-Every Child Matters,
Exactly right.
Pre the role of the DCS.
Yeah,
all of that.
totally, yeah.
And we'll be coming to that. Okay. So the School Improvement Recognition Scheme was another government initiative that we supported, so I thought I'd share that with you. And then during this period also we had a working alliance with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And these were big national events. The first one, we had 165 people in London at this. New challenges, new learning, lifelong learning in the new millennium. And then we got some specific contracts with the department on surrounded by this scheme that the DFES then called compacts. During this period, the Society of Education Officers morphed into the Confederation of Education Service Managers, and under that banner then we started doing work on behalf of the sector, recognised as being the CPD arm of Confed.
Yeah.
And so we had a governance arrangement as a college with that. We were written into the constitution of Confed as being the sector CPD arm, and it's in that relationship that the department worked with us.
Sorry to chip in, I just love how the college always manages to be somewhat at the forefront, because there's actually a thing on March the 12th, 2002 on the future of e-learning.
There you go.
Who knew?
22 years ago.
Yeah.
I know. And the freaky thing was, looking back, that it was basically three of us and a dog.
Yeah.
Doing this work, because I had a philosophy of worrying about how we're going to sustain this financially. So I reached an agreement with David Crackman, who was the first chair of the board, that we would try and generate enough income to provide 12 months barrier of trading. So if everything stopped, it would buy us, we'd have enough resource for another 12 months to try and rescue kind of the model. That then moved on to the school improvement work, and this is a copy of the launch of the national standards and framework for training and development of school improvement professionals, again supported by the Department of Education and Skills, it was called at that time, so I thought you'd be interested in that. Still very much in the space of education and school improvement. So what then happened is we gained a reputation at the department, and I've realised over the years that's how things happen with the department, that someone senior there recognises you, so when they're in policy discussions you become the go-to place, so they then instruct their comms team to approach you. And that can happen until that person leaves. And then the relationship changed. So we had a period of about 5 years where magic happened, and a lot of work that led to Every Child Matters, we were involved in creating and working on. So that's 2000 and 2003. And then 2003-04, we had the Green Paper, and then the Children Act of 2004, and the construct of a DCS being invented.
Yeah.
Unusual legislation, really, because there was no prescription. Basically, everyone had to have a DCS by a given date, but who it was, what they did, etc., was pretty much open for discussion.
Yeah, totally.
So at that point, the Staff College was the only agency in that space, and we started here in Manchester doing action learning sets for people who'd been appointed to be the DCS, and talking to them, how they got appointed was so varied. In one case, the leader of the council walked down a corridor, put their arm round the Director of Education as it was, and says, "You know this new DCS job? That will be you, because I want to keep you and I want to keep my Director of Social Care Adults. If I give it to my adult person, you will have to leave because you don't have the background in social care to do the work. So this way, it's you. Thank you. See you later."
And while some places might have had a more formal procedure around than that, in reality, a lot of the early directors of children's services were from an education background, and probably for similar reasons.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was one of those first directors, and that was almost what happened. Myself and the Director of Adult Services had a very noble conversation with each other, and she said she didn't mind which way she went, but recognised I couldn't do the adults job, and I said I don't want to do the adults job, but I would like the children's job, and so it happened.
So that was the beginning of the college's transition from just education, because obviously in the actual learning sets we had to kind of explore the kind of new terrain. So that led to the next phase of work, which is 2005-2008, where we were in partnership with, the college was in partnership with the Children's Workforce Development Council. We developed regional leadership programs, which was in that growing space of children's services, etc. I was involved representing education at the time in the reference group that wrote Championing Children, the document. That then led to a national professional development framework, which is for me, one of the high points of the college in that period, that we worked directly with civil servants to write that piece of work, which was great. And out of that came a professional development framework at national level for both Scotland and Wales, because by that time the VSC, Virtual Staff College, had a Scottish equivalent and a Welsh equivalent. So that takes us to 2009 and a discussion at the North of England conference in Chester in January. So at that point there was an announcement by the then Secretary of State that there'd be a new national programme of leadership development for directors of children's services, and that was the government response to Baby Peter and all of that. So I'd arrived to give a workshop on that day, direct from Vancouver, where I'd been at an international conference on school improvement. But the way that happened and the college's involvement in that whole initiative was that in October 2008 I got a phone call from a colleague at the National College of School Leadership saying, "You never guess what's happened, Anton. We've had a call from the Secretary of State saying that our remit's going to be extended to include a new national, soon-to-be-announced programme of leadership development for directors of children's services and those close to the role, i.e. aspirants. We know a lot about school improvement, but we know absolutely nothing about children's services improvement. But we know an organisation that does know a lot about that. So would you be prepared to help?" Out of that debate, it was agreed that I'd be seconded from the college to be the strategic advisor to the initiative, and would I please be part of the announcements at the North of England conference, which I said, yeah, but I'll have to get back early from Vancouver to do it. And that was a really interesting event because it was the first time that people felt that they'd been noticed as needing leadership development at systemic level. And as you know, because it's all down in history, that led to a kind of 5-year programme of national development. So out of that, we supported that initiatives, and then 2011, following the 2010 general election, where the new Secretary of State decided that the National College should refocus entirely on school stuff and stop, to use a narrative, messing around with children's services stuff. So who would take on the remaining period of the contract? To cut a long story short, it ended up with the college offering to be an interim arrangement, and at the time the department thought that we could just 2p everything over to us until they hit the European Union legislation about state funding. So we took it on, and then within 6 months had to then formally bid. We were lucky to get that bid, and so we took it over on 2011. Interestingly, the day of the transition, we had a cohort at the National College. So the day started with one set of branding and ended with another set of branding at the end of the day. Other than that, we didn't drop the ball, so I was really pleased. Now, that leads to the next phase, is 2012-15. During that period, the aspirant programme was developed fully, the Bally programme was developed fully, and the Bally programme was a commission I'm really pleased about. And we had Patrick Scott working with us at the time, and his work was being phased out, so he seemed to be an ideal person for me to say, will you take the lead on this? And I had conversations with some of the key players like Mira and Rosemary here in London, in a place not unlike this, you know, kind of free meeting space, where we were talking about the idea. Why did Bally happen? It happened because earlier that year the department had asked whether we could help them find senior leadership people from ethnic minority background and heritage background to join inspection teams, and there were none. So we realised there was an issue there. I of course thought that the glass ceiling was at AD level. When we looked into it, it wasn't. It was much lower down, and it was because of a lack of confidence by colleagues, non-white colleagues, to move into that strategic space, and without being in that strategic space they can never kind of become ADs and then have the background for that. So that's how Bally started, and through you, it's really expanded, so that's a main difference. The other element that we had, and one of the really nice things about that period, was we had enough funding through that work to commission research. So we directly commissioned the international research on systems leadership, which is now part of the bedrock as a construct of leadership. We then introduced the notion of think pieces. We had an international seminar on inclusion during that period. And then the following period, which is towards 2019, annual think tanks, and then the bespoke work for local authorities started in a big way. So that's a kind of hop and a skip that takes us through to 2019-20, and we're approaching the period of you joining the fray, so to speak.
And so in those early days, Anton, was most of the work of the staff college funded through Department for Education then? Was any of it sort of commissions from individual organisations, or because when we come on to sort of where we're at now, and I think it's quite an interesting potential development there.
In the early years, it was through subscriptions.
Right.
that were paid in the initial phase to SEO. So when I joined, we had to unravel all the budgets, which was an interesting process. And I think we ended up with something like 70,000. And the business plan was based on a minimum of 75 grand a year of subscriptions. Within the first 18 months, that wasn't going to happen. So again, at board level, we had a conversation, out of which came the Price Waterhouse stuff, because we earn quite a lot of money through those big national events. And that then led to a move away from subscriptions. And it took a lot of time. It was a lot of nagging, invoicing, cajoling. We then went into a regional model, and we had regional subscriptions, and we delivered bespoke leadership programs for the individual regions. Northwest we did work, Eastern region we did work quite a lot. When we were responsible for the DCS program, we persuaded the department to fund some formal regional leadership development based on a pipeline of opportunities.
That's right, yeah.
And that became a really coherent model for 4 or 5 years. And then more and more the bespoke programs started generating more and more. If I'm totally honest with you, a large bulk of the inheritance that both of you got was from the period of the National Leadership Programme, because we were paid, the college was paid properly at market level for my secondment in. But we kept the ship very lean back at the ranch, and that generated quite a lot of kind of revenue that then enabled us to develop all the subsequent stuff over the years.
So having gone through all of that, setting it up, all those different challenges and you know, untangling of things and finding your place, that must have been quite hard to step back and to hand over the reins to someone else.
Well, I remember
I
I was talking to Martin Pratt, who was then the chair of the board, and he was really worried about that.
Yeah.
And I said, I wouldn't worry, because I'm really, really good at going into the next box and shutting the door. And Jo and I know each other. I think she gets the culture of the college, which was always right from the beginning. It was framed as, it's never about us, it's always about them.
Yeah.
You know, and we tried for many years to get ex-directors in to do work, and most of them couldn't do it because they forgot that it wasn't about them, because they were so used to being, you know, at the front, you know, holding the leadership position from the front. So developing constructs of systems leadership about seeding in order to gain was difficult for quite a lot of directors, and I understand why, but Jo wasn't one of those, and therefore I felt quite strongly that she'd be a really ideal person to follow from me. Also, we agreed that I'd hang around for 2 years as strategic advisor, and then if it didn't work, fine, I'd disappear, and if it did work, then we'd see. So I think I'm really lucky, and the college is lucky, that we've managed that cultural succession of what is the DNA of the college to continue, because it would have been really difficult for me had it been broken at that point. But it was easy because it wasn't.
Stepping into shoes that had established an organisation and all of these things, how did that? What attracted you to the job?
Ooh, sounds like my interview. Well, initially I was not attracted to it at all. I'll be totally honest. I'd joined the college as an associate and was thoroughly enjoying delivering on the then aspirant programme and doing various bespoke work. And I knew the college was looking for a new chief exec, but had no interest in that because I'd just finished being a director for 15 years. So my promise to myself was, I've been directing for 15 years, I don't want to direct anything anymore. And so it was quite a lot of persuasion that was needed to get me into the role, but I'll talk about that shortly.
you.